24 years after this girl vanished on Thanksgiving, her brother made a disturbing confession. In a police interview room in Florida, a young man labors over a confession. His sister disappeared more than 24 years ago, and officers are trying to close the case. Does David Lambert know more about the mystery than he's been letting on? As investigators edge closer to the truth, a disturbing secret is apparently revealed. The story begins on November 27, 1985, when David and his sister, Martha Jean, are living with their parents, Howard and Margaret, in St. Augustine, a city on the northeast coast of Florida. Like many of their neighbors, the Lamberts live in a trailer in a semi-rural area a few miles away from the area's popular beaches. At the time, David was 14, while Martha Jean was 12. A 7th grader at the city's Ketter Linus Junior High School, she was of small stature, weighing only 70 pounds. However, according to David, she had a combative nature that made her a force to be reckoned with, despite her slender frame. That day, the Lamberts were getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, they burned the turkey, and Howard reacted with anger. Eager to escape their father's shouting, David and Martha Jean left the trailer, and as they wandered around the neighborhood, David gave his sister some money to spend in a local store. Eventually, David and Martha Jean arrived at the defunct Florida Memorial College. By then, the building had already been abandoned for several years, and even though it was scattered with rubble and shards of glass, it was a popular place for the local youngsters to play. In fact, in a 2010 interview with the St. Augustine Record, one detective described it as like a poor kid's Disney World. Sadly, David and Martha Jean's adventure was about to take a tragic turn. According to David, his sister had decided to leave the abandoned college and go somewhere else to play. After that, she simply vanished. And even though police launched an investigation, no trace of the girl could be found. Over the years, several attempts were made to get to the bottom of Martha Jean's disappearance. And right from the start, detectives had suspected that David may have known more than he was letting on. But without any clear evidence to prove a crime had been committed, they were unable to take action against him. Meanwhile, life in St. Augustine moved on. Devastated by their daughter's disappearance, Margaret and Howard went their separate ways. Then, in the year 2000, David found himself in trouble with the police after allegedly attempting to write a bad check. And when they picked him up, he reportedly made a bizarre confession. In a 2010 interview with news website Jacksonville.com, St. Johns County Detective Sean Tice revealed that David had claimed to know what had happened to Martha Jean. "I need to get this off my chest," Lambert is reported to have said. "I'm responsible for my sister's death." Apparently, he went on to confess that he had buried Martha Jean in a local coquina mine. But when police arrived at the mine to investigate, they could find no trace of Martha Jean's corpse. And in the absence of this vital evidence, no charges were brought against David. Then in June 2010, Tice and another detective, Howard Cole III, made a final attempt to solve the most lengthy missing persons case that the county had ever known. Initially, Tice and Cole began their investigation by interviewing friends, family members, and neighbors who had lived near the Lamberts at the time of Martha Jean's disappearance. Interestingly, a number of them suggested that the officers should take a closer look at David's story. Finally, in August 2010, Tice and Cole brought David into the interview room, and over the course of 3 sessions, he gradually confessed to his role in his sister's disappearance. Apparently, on that fateful day in 1985, Martha Jean had asked him for more money when they arrived at Florida Memorial College, but David had refused. According to David, the belligerent Martha had lashed out and hit her brother. Retaliating, David pushed her away, but the slight girl fell over backwards, hitting her head on a piece of metal jutting out from the ground. Apparently, it pierced her skull, causing a fatal injury. However, indirectly, David believed that he had been the cause of his sister's death. According to Tice's report, David said that he had tried to help the girl at first. D. Lambert stated that when he lifted Martha up, there was a large hole in the back of her head and blood was pouring out, he wrote. D. Lambert stated he initially called out for help, hoping that someone would be walking by and hear his cries. But when no one came, David took matters into his own hands. Allegedly, he used a broken road sign as a shovel to dig a makeshift grave. And when the detectives asked him why he had not told his parents the truth, he told them that he'd been scared of their reaction. In fact, Tice believes that David was living in fear of Margaret, a situation that continues to this day. He was terrified of his mama, he wrote, still is. Eventually, spurred on by a photograph of Martha Jean that Tice had placed on the table, David wrote and signed a statement. In it, he finally admitted to his role in his sister's death. Alongside the written statement, David also drew a map for investigators, identifying the plot upon which Florida Memorial College stood. It allegedly showed where Martha Jean was buried. Duly, a team was sent out to investigate, but even though trained police dogs reacted to a certain spot, the crew were unable to locate a body. However, Margaret has not been as easy to convince. According to her, David has been known to invent stories in order to get attention, and she does not believe his confession. Instead, she believes that her daughter was kidnapped. Adding to the confusion, David himself later withdrew his statement, claiming that he had only told the officers what he believed they wanted to hear. Despite Margaret's protests, the investigation into Martha Jean's disappearance has been closed. Even though police believe him to be guilty, David will not be facing any charges. A 2010 press release from the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office states, "Changes in the law since 1985, statute of limitations, the suspect's age at the time and other mitigating circumstances would preclude charges from being filed."